Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Respected brothers, sisters, welcome back to the final segment for the Crusaders or the Fall of Jerusalem series that we've had. You may recall last week was a mixture of emotions. We spoke about how initially the Muslims had a resurgence. The spirit of jihad was there to try and get back the holy lands from those who came to occupy them for nearly 200 years. We were all gripped when we went through the whole journey of how it began with Imaduddin Zingi, then Nuruddin Zingi, then Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimullah, and then how Palestine was liberated, or Jerusalem was liberated. So before we actually go to the final segment today, just want to give a little recap of last week, and then inshallah we'll get the context in order, and then we can begin from there. So in fact, I want to take it a step back. Let's go back to the time of the whole Crusades in a nutshell, an overview, so you can get a bit more context. 1096 or 95, sorry, when the Pope Urban II, he made that passionate plea in Clermont in France, where he gathered all the people together and he said, we must take Jerusalem back from the infidels. These are all things which are documented and recorded by historians, both Western and Islamic. And then as a result of this, in 1096, an army of 60,000 Crusaders went, and this was Godfrey and Baldwin and Bohemond and Raymond. All these big princes went with their army, and they went to eventually take over Jerusalem. And the taking over of Jerusalem was something that has been well documented. Over 50,000 Muslims were killed over a course of 10 days. The doors were shut behind. When the governor went, he said, let us go back, the Fatimids go back to Egypt, we will not fight. And Redall said, okay, fine, all the soldiers can go. And as they allowed all the soldiers to leave, when the last soldiers went, they closed the doors, and then they began to kill all of the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Because naturally they're thinking, what are we going to do with these people? The soldiers have gone, and they didn't have that clemency in their hearts to say, okay, let them stay here and maybe we can make them into servants or whatever. They said, no, we have to clean Jerusalem from these infidels. And it was documented that over 50,000 Muslims, majority Muslims, 98% Muslims, 2-3% you could say Jews, were also burnt to death, and that's how they took Jerusalem. Then we spoke about last week's segment when Imaduddin came on the scene in the year 1100. There was a resurgence. You had the Zengid dynasty. Imaduddin liberated Edessa. Edessa was a state of the Crusaders, and that was liberated in the year 1144, which then sparked the Second Crusade. By the way, there were 8 crusades. 8 crusades. The Second Crusade fizzled out, and then the Third Crusade was when Richard the Lionheart came. And he came at the back end of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimullah, taking Jerusalem in 1187. Okay? Just want to mention a few points about the death of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimullah, then we'll continue from today's series. So it's mentioned about Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimullah, he passed away after around 10 days of being ill. So he was ill for 10 days, and his immune system went down because he was busy all the time, running around, delegating, meeting people, really kept himself busy. And eventually he began to get weak, fever overtook him, and he passed away. Narrations mention that when his body was laid to rest, the Qadi came to his tomb carrying his sword, and he placed the sword of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimullah next to the body of Salahuddin, and he said that this sword This sayf will bear witness to the 16 years of battle for the supreme cause, in which you won magnificent victories and shook the foundation of Europe. Remember, it was the Europeans, the Crusaders, who left Europe. They left France, they left Italy, they left England, they left Germany to come and take over Jerusalem in a bloody manner, not in a peaceful way. And the Qadi is saying it is this sword and 16 years of fighting in the path of Allah to reclaim, to defend the Muslims. This sword will bear witness. And wallahi, even the Crusaders were sad about the death of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah. It's mentioned that it's even documented and recorded that they stated that we saw no one with the moral conduct, the ethics of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi among the Muslims and the Christians who fought during the Crusades. Remember the times he would just let people go? He would take over Jerusalem and say, okay, you can leave. As long as you leave your weapons, drop your weapons, we will not kill you. I am Salahuddin. I am not like the Crusaders who will line everybody up and start chopping people's heads. I'm not like this. And the only people who he did kill were the people like the Knights Templars, who were seasoned warriors whose main focus was to kill the Muslims. So he went for those particular people, and he went for Raymond because Raymond deliberately violated the treaty on many occasions. Also, another important point I wanted to mention before I move over onto what happened after Salahuddin passed away was that shortly before he actually passed away, another narration is that Salahuddin called the standard bearer. You know, in battles before, there used to be a standard bearer. There used to be a big flag that used to be waved to show the enemy and to the Muslims that, look, this is where the main center of control is. This is where the main commander is. And that was normally surrounded by many soldiers. So he called the standard bearer, who he used to take with him to all the battles. And he said to him, come here. Remember, he was feeling weak. He said, you have carried my banner in war for 16 years. And you should also carry it after my death. And then he said, I want you to set it at the top of a big lance, and I want you to walk through the streets of Syria. And I want you to call the people and say that this belongs to the king. King meaning obviously Salahuddin, who has died. And he has taken nothing with him apart from his shroud. Just let people know that I have fought in the path of Allah. This is also something that will bear witness. And look, at the only thing that I'm taking with me is my kafan. And you know, this banner, this cloth, it's mentioned, he never changed it for 16 years. This banner, this cloth that he would take into battle, it survived, you know, the heat of battle and all being knocked down, and it was still flying high as he passed away. And he told the person to go through and tell people, look, the only thing you take is your kafan. So that is the passing away of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah. And I mentioned this last time, look at the qabuliyya, look at the acceptance in the ummah. Allah gives us acceptance. Acceptance cannot be bought by anyone. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be, this comes from Allah. And this is reflected through the name of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah wherever you go in the Muslim world. You go to Indonesia, Africa, Nigeria, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, any Muslim world, and you say to anyone Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, they say, they love the person, because Allah placed that special respect in the heart of us as an ummah for Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah. So now let's look at today's talk. Where did it go wrong? What happened after the demise of this great man that we know as Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah? Unfortunately, there were many more crusades that took place. The third one was where we left it, where Richard the Lionheart and his people came. They lost, there was a truce, they went back. There was a fourth. nothing major. There was a fifth, again, nothing major. Then there was the sixth crusade, And unfortunately, during the sixth crusade, the Crusaders retook Jerusalem. But they retook it for 15 years. And you must be wondering, how did they retake it? What kind of army came? What kind of murder, what kind of pillage, what kind of savagery took place? And you'd be surprised to know, nothing like that took place at all. It was a straightforward handover by the man who was the Ayyubid ruler at that time. His name was As-Salih Ismail. As-Salih Ismail. And what he did wasn't very salih, wasn't very righteous. What he did was he was so busy, occupied with the siege in fighting his own nephew. His nephew's name was An-Nasir Dawood, not An-Nasir, An-Nasir. So he's busy taking his troops and saying, okay, we have this internal rivalry. And he was focusing on the siege in Damascus. And the Crusaders thought, hey, we have an opportunity here. Let us go and attack Jerusalem, because these guys are preoccupied in fighting themselves. And when he sees this big Crusader army coming to attack, instead of defending Jerusalem like they used to, like the 4th Crusade and the 5th Crusade, they'd send people out that fight, Crusaders would retreat. They found themselves in a vulnerable situation. So what did he do? He said, okay, I agree to give over Jerusalem to you. As long as you allow us to, pray and don't do anything, don't really desecrate our places, please, we'll become subservient to you. And the narrations mention when the Crusaders came back, they came in, they began to celebrate. Like, wow, we can't believe we have got Jerusalem back. And they went to the Temple Mount and they had a massive feast. And the narrations mention that they were drinking wine and they were having all kinds of festivities, knowing that they got back to Jerusalem without doing anything. And as a result of his disloyalty, the Ummah, the Muslims, were very upset because of what As-Salih did. And this roused many negative sentiments and emotions against him. So the ulama, the religious authorities, what did they do? They told the people that it is no longer incumbent upon you to have him as your leader. You don't have to follow his orders. You don't have to pledge allegiance to the Sultan as well. For what he's done, it's fine. You can rebel against him. And really, it just goes to show you, we were supposed to talk about the lessons we can derive. To explain the lessons are going to be presented to you as we go on this timeline. And one of the main lessons here is, look at this. After Salahuddin al-Ayyubi went, we Muslims start fighting amongst ourselves again. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi spent so much time bringing the Ummah together. They were fragmented, they were polarized. He brought them together and then he took over Jerusalem. And as soon as he passes away, it's not even been 100 years, 50 odd years, in 1229, Crusaders come and they take over Jerusalem again for 15 years. But this only lasted 15 years. In the year 1248, the 7th Crusade began with the Muslims reclaiming Jerusalem. Remember, the Muslims came back from Syria, from Egypt. They go, we don't need this guy. He's a sellout. Whatever he did, no problem. We will retake Jerusalem. And they fought and they retook Jerusalem. And from that time on until now, Jerusalem, well, now it's obviously more so in the hands of Israel. The Muslims still had Jerusalem. So they did lose it for 15 years. Just want to share that with you. And that was because of weak governance. The 8th Crusade, actually before the 8th Crusade, in 1248, I want to bring in another actor or a character. So they were a bit more dominant now than the Ayyubids, because before the Ayyubids we had the who? The Seljuks. Before the Seljuks we had the Abbasids, and Bani Umayyah. All of these dynasties, and now it's the turn of the Mamluks. And they took over Jerusalem from 1248. They were the ones who were defending against the Crusaders. And they restored the pride in the Muslim world. And the last crusade that we know of was the 8th Crusade. When the King Louis IX, he said, you know what, forget going all the way into the Middle East. Let's just start off in North Africa. Let's just go to the Tunisian Muslim ruler and sweet talk him, convert him to Christianity. And once we convert him to Christianity, we can hopefully form an alliance, and from there we can go in and take the Holy Land. But the Muslim ruler says no. So then he's forced to send his army, and as they land in Tunisia, the qadr of Allah overtakes them, the army falls sick, and he himself, King Louis IX, he dies when he arrives in Tunisia. And then the rest, when the soldiers go on to fight, the Mamluks deal with them. So that basically was the end of the Crusaders. After that, they were in the Holy Land, they were technically sent backpacking. So another theme I quickly want to mention is that the Crusaders from Europe went to the Middle East, went to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, to the Holy Lands for 200 years. Over 200 years. Shows you the dedication, the determination, what Jerusalem means to the powers in Europe. Italy, France, Germany, UK, the Christian world. That they were willing to go, die, and every time when the Muslims fought back, then the Pope would say, okay, another crusade. Crusade meaning what? Holy war. The infidels have taken your lands, the land of Christ, where Christ was born. And this would then arouse the sentiments of the people, and they would go, and the kings would put millions from their treasures and money and resources, and they would get the knights, and they would go back. And this is something that is a key theme, because you need to understand the determination of the European states and the Christian world, of what Jerusalem means to them, right up until this very day. But the battle is different now. It's a bit more ideological. It's not military. They can't go in. It's a bit more political. Then we move over to the year 1517 to 1917, the Ottoman period. The Mamluk dynasty finishes in the year 1517. Guess how? Guess who fights them? It's the Muslims again. So the Ottomans have come on the scene, and they've defeated the Mamluks. The Mamluks' time has come. Okay, see you later. You've been in charge for 300 odd years. Now let us come in. And so the Ottoman Empire defeats the Mamluks in Egypt, and now it's time for the Ottoman Empire to reign supreme over the Muslim world and those lands for 400 years. From 1517 to 1917, when the Ottoman Caliphate was dissolved, finished, they ruled for 400 years. And according to history, there were many achievements according to what they did. A man named Suleiman the Magnificent, he built the entire walls around Jerusalem. Jerusalem over time saw much fighting. They used to use these big catapults to really break down the walls historically. That's how fighting was done before. Flamethrowers. They used to use siege towers, and all this kind of stuff. So he did all this work to reconstruct the outer walls. Also, something else that was happening in Europe in the 15th, 16th century was there was a change in the doctrine of the Christian religion. Generally, it was very Roman Catholic dominant. But then all of a sudden, Martin Luther King comes on the scene, and he introduces Protestant reform. They started going against the Pope. We don't believe in popes and saints and these kind of things, miracles. We believe you have to, their focus was more on reviving the Old Testament. And this is the new doctrine of the Protestants. And this is going to be very important, because later on in the year 1789, a movement from England, who were called the Puritans, evangelical Christians, very Protestant, they moved, or they were ousted from this country, and they went on to set up what country? America. So that is why generally America is known as being a very evangelical Christian country, where you have the Bible Belt in Texas. These areas, they're very pro, waiting for the return of the Messiah, very kind of biblical Old Testament kind of thing. So this was something that was taking place, and that's really going to affect what we are going to talk about in the latter or the next 200 or 300 years. Because in the year 1791, there's also reconciliation between Judaism and Christianity. Before, the Christian world, according to history, hated the Jews. Remember, they wouldn't allow them even into Jerusalem. It was the Muslims. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he did the Umayyad treaty, where he allowed 70 families back into Jerusalem. The Christians were like, no, these people, we believe, that's what the Christians said. They said, we believe these were the ones who killed Christ. They were instrumental in killing Christ. So they had a natural tendency to hate the Jews. And that's why you may remember in the first crusade, the People's Crusade, Peter the Hermit, when he took people from Europe, from France, the first casualty at the Rhineland in Germany was 20,000 Jews slaughtered by the Crusaders, the People's Army, because they didn't like Jews. And this was the pattern that had developed over many years, but in 1791, there was a reconciliation. They began to form this alliance and say we need to work hand in hand. Then we start seeing battles taking place within the Ottoman Empire, where people like Napoleon, he comes on the scene. You can see the Crusaders are trying to come back, but they're not calling it the Crusades. There's another way now. There's nation states now. And they are coming in and they are just trying to colonize and take over as much land as they can. And Napoleon, he was instrumental in fighting the Muslims in Egypt, and he actually wanted to take over Palestine, and he was the first person who actually vocalized this. He said, I promise to settle the Jews in Palestine. Napoleon is saying this, French commander, French leader of the army at that time. He is actually proactive, and he actually makes his claim. And what happens, because he makes his claim, he gains a lot of support from the Jewish world in both Europe and the rest of the world. They go, yeah, this guy's got a good plan. Hey, we didn't think about this. We're actually allowed to go back and live in a place that we haven't seen for many, many, many years. Another thing I want to mention about Napoleon is that whilst he was fighting the Muslims, the Ottoman Empire, and he knew that he couldn't actually go into Palestine, there was resistance. As he was coming back, he had 3,000 prisoners, Ottoman prisoners. And he thought, I'm lumbered with these people. You know, I'm burdened. You can't just put them in an aeroplane and say, I have to travel with these people, what do I do? So him and his army with that fatigue, they just lined them up in one day, lined them up and shot them. 3,000 Ottoman prisoners in one day. Remember we spoke about how we had days of killing when it came to Jerusalem. We had the Battle of Acre, when Richard the Lionheart, when Salahuddin agreed with him, look, don't kill these 3,000 prisoners. Majority of them are soldiers, yes, but there are women, there are men. We will give you the ransom. Just give us a few days. And Richard became very impatient. And then he just lost it. He said, okay, take all of these prisoners outside, line them up outside the castle in front of the view of Salahuddin and all his army, and he began to have all their heads chopped off. And the narrations mention Salahuddin and his army, they were there crying. They couldn't do anything. Because remember, they had to give up the garrison. They had to retreat. And those people who were left in the garrison, in the Battle of Acre, in the castle, Salahuddin said, listen, we'll give you as much money as you want. Just give us time. And then he just lost it. And then these are the type of killings that we have seen from people against Muslim prisoners. And then the Zionism movement begins, because Napoleon mentions something that triggers something in the mind of Hungarian-born Theodor Herzl. 1896. He publishes a book titled The Jewish State, calling for the creation of a Jewish state solely for the people of Jewish background in Palestine. He begins this. Remember, generally, the traditional Orthodox doctrine of the Jewish community is that you're not allowed to go back to the Promised Land. We have been kicked out of the Promised Land. We have to wait for the Messiah to return, and the Messiah will take us to the Promised Land. We cannot make the Promised Land back to Jerusalem and then call him. He's the one who's going to take us back. We have to wait for him. That's the traditional view of Orthodox Jews. But the Zionism movement was the other way around. It said, no, we will go to Palestine, we will take over the land by force, and then once we've done A, B, and C, then the Messiah will be sent to us. That's why when you go to protests, Palestine protests, many Orthodox Jews are there with their black hats and the way they dress. And they always say, this is wrong what these Zionists are doing. It's wrong. We are not supposed to we're not supposed to do this. We are waiting for the Messiah to be sent by God, who will then take us to the nation to set up or form Israel. But anyway, the Zionism movement has begun, and Theodor Herzl, he begins lobbying the Sultan at that time. And the Sultan at that time was Abdul Hamid. And he promises he's got the backing of wealthy Jewish finances. The Ottoman Empire was going under a crippling debt worldwide. They were just spread all over the place. And they had all this debt, and he thought of a plan. He said, you know what? I will go to the Sultan and I will say, listen, we can free up your debt. Just give us Palestine and we will pay off all your debts. So he actually, in 1901, it's documented that Theodore, he actually went and he met the Ottoman officials in an attempt to negotiate this. Look, we'll pay off part of your foreign debts. We know you owe X, Y, and Z European country. We can wipe that clean. The Ottoman Empire will not have no debts. We will also provide huge loans to strengthen your empire. We can see that the Ottoman Empire isn't what it used to be, but we promise to finance you. And we will also bring in influential financiers to support Sultan Hamid and his government. Remember, we've got the Rothschilds, we've got these big influential Jewish bankers and these kind of financial minds that will come and support you. And we know that Sultan Abdul Hamid, he categorically refused. He said, no way. You will not get an inch of land. And he said, and this is what he said, his words were, I will not sell a single inch of land, for it does not belong to me, but to my people. They paid for it with their blood. Let the Jews keep their millions. When my state is divided, they may take Palestine for free, meaning over my dead body. You can't just, I'm not going to do this. But as long as I am alive, I will not allow this. So you can see the economic, political pressure they are putting Ottoman Empire at that time, Sultan Abdul Hamid. Even though he's going through financial problems as an empire, and he's been given all these incentives, we'll do this and we'll make you a superpower and we'll give you X, Y, and Z. He's saying no. And pale that into comparison with the Muslim world right now. Look at the Muslim world. America will say, we'll give you this, we'll give you X, Y, and Z, we'll train your army up, we'll give you X billions every year, and it's like, yeah, no problem. It's like, this is not the first time when political or economic leverage has been used on individuals. But the people at that time were different caliber. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Nuruddin al-Zingi, even Sultan Abdul Hamid, they said no, we put the Ummah first. Yes, there were certain people who were sellouts, like the 6th Crusade. He said, yeah, come and take Jerusalem. But generally, people of that time, the leaders were of a different caliber. They just didn't bow down and say, okay, come and take it. 1914, you know what happened in 1914? Anyone know what happened in 1914 in the year 1332 of Hijri calendar? No. World War, yes, the youngsters, mashallah, see his history there, they learn history. 1914, the First World War. And the Ottoman Empire got kind of drawn in. First they were neutral, but they got drawn in and they allied with who? Germany. And Britain saw this as a clear red flag. And they said, this is a threat. And then they said, we're busy fighting the Germans or whatever. We're going to try and cause some discord within the Ottoman Empire. And this is something else you need to understand, guys. Look how they created something that we can see. Divide and conquer, divide and conquer. They created an Arab revolt. They said the Muslims are easier defeated if we create or place certain characters or actors within who can create polarization, fragment the Muslim Ummah from within. So they called upon a man, Lawrence of Arabia. Films are made about this person, real life person. History testifies to this fact that this person was a person who was an agent, and his job was to create this revolt by promising the Arabs, listen, if you help us, if you support us against these Ottoman Empire, then we promise that once we beat them, we break the empire down, we will give you X, Y, and Z. Imagine this. You will be in charge of your own lands. You will have, like Pan-Arab nationalism, they call it, that kind of, okay, you're going to have your own place. And they got Sharif Hussein of Makkah to declare the revolt. So he was the main head of the Arabs at that time, who didn't really see the Ottomans eye to eye. So they said, okay, fine, British, we're with you. Lawrence of Arabia, he's the man who joins as a British liaison officer. He's supplying them money to the resistance to the revolt. He's supplying them weapons and strategy. This is all documented. All documented and recorded. So he basically, Lawrence of Arabia, unfortunately, he worked as a bridge between the British and Sharif Hussein's forces during the First World War. He promised the Arabs independence and a great Arab kingdom. Okay, because you don't have to be ruled by the Turks. You'll have your own kingdom if you fight against these Ottomans. But behind the scenes, Britain and France had already, you'll get to see, had already planned to divide the land. In the boardroom meetings that they had, they already planned. We'll tell Lawrence of Arabia to rouse the Arabs to fight against the Ottomans, which he did, and then they will think that they're fighting for a just cause, that they will get their land and they'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. But behind the scene, they're saying, okay, once this great empire that has been lasting for 400 years, once it's finished, then we'll say to the Arabs, thank you very much, see you later. And this is what happened. Unfortunately, it hurts. This is exactly what happened, leaving the Arabs betrayed. The Arabs weren't happy. They didn't go in there deliberately to say, okay, thank you very much. They felt betrayed because they genuinely felt that they were going in to take over the Ottoman Empire or to finish it, because they didn't feel that they were running things properly. They didn't see each other eye to eye. But Britain did what it does, what it did best in those days. And even in his writings, there's a book, Lawrence of Arabia, he wrote, it's called 7 Pillars of Wisdom. He confesses in the book that he knew Britain would never allow true Arab independence, but he still played along. He still played along. He was playing, taking everyone for a ride. And then, whilst these secret deals were being done, then we had the Sykes and the Picot Agreement in 1916, which really showed the reality of what happened. When the Ottoman Empire broke its back, then the British and the French, they divided the Ottoman lands between them. They didn't say, Arabs, come here, well done, you'll get everything as promised. The British and the French, they broke it down. How did they break it down? France took what? It's all documented anyway. If anyone says, oh, blah, they can't say anything because this is there, it's in history. How? France took Syria. That's why still to this day, Lebanon, Syria, you get people speak French. Okay? I don't know if you remember, going off in a bit of a tangent, when the recent fighting was taking place between Hezbollah and Israel, and it got a bit heated last year. You can remember France was always being involved by Israel and America. They were telling France was being told by these Western countries to rein in on Lebanon. These are your people, you have a relationship with them. You guys are the ones who formed them 70 years ago. But anyway, coming back to the point, France took Syria and Lebanon. Britain took, again, Iraq. It was under British jurisdiction. It took Palestine and it took Transjordan, which is now called Jordan. Again, it's documented. It's there. History. Sharif's sons, you remember Sharif was from Mecca. They said, look, we'll give you a carrot. His two sons were briefly named, you're the king of Syria, Faisal, and another one was king of Iraq. So we'll make you token kings. So you can go around and say, I'm a king. One was king of Syria and one was king of Iraq. And then Abdullah became the ruler of Jordan. These were all people who were put in by the British and the French under a plan to break the Ottoman Empire. And I'm just reporting history here. This is what happened. I'm a reporter. Okay? Reporting what exactly took place. Okay. So 1917 was when so a year after, when they actually, you know, narrations mention on a napkin, they actually drew the lines out. So the Ottoman Empire was all of Arabia, all of Syria. There's no Iraq, there's no Syria, there's no Jordan. They just made lines. Okay, that's going to be Jordan. That's going to be Syria. That's going to be Lebanon. So France said, okay, we'll take this, and then they drew out another, carved something else out, and then England said, okay, Britain said, okay, we'll take Iraq, and we'll take Palestine. That's how it happened. Subhanallah. This is why it's important to understand our history. And a year later, the Balfour Declaration came in, 1917. When Britain promised a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. They go, now we're ready. Before it was very hard. The Ottomans, a big empire, the Muslim world, Muslims from India, from Africa, Muslims in the Arab world, everyone was under the Ottoman Empire. We broke this empire that spanned for 400 years. Now it made our job a lot easier. And the Jews, you can come back and take over Palestine. And again, something that has been recorded, General Edmund Allenby, and I mentioned this, when he actually took over, First World War has finished, they've broken the Ottoman Empire, they've taken what they wanted. He actually makes his way with the French commander Henry Jourad, however we pronounce his name. And the French commander, he kicked the tomb of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah. He kicked it. It's next to the Ummah Masjid. They went because remember, they had this awe of Salahuddin had this aura in the Europeans. Who was this man who challenged the Crusaders? Who was merciful, who was compassionate, and he was like a hero. And they went to the tomb and he kicked the tomb and he said, awake! Salahuddin, wake! We have returned. My presence here confirms the victory of the cross over the crescent. These are documented, written words. He said this. And they felt bold enough to say it. Strong enough to say it. The words, they're written in history. Now you can go to any textbook and these are famous words, because now they knew the Muslims have got nothing. And now, 80, 90 years later, we find ourselves right at the bottom of the rubbish tip. From where we were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, now we're at the worst. And then we had 1920 to 1947, the British Mandate of Palestine, where they encourage growing Jewish immigration. Come on in. We'll help you suppress the Arab resistance. If they're fighting, we'll give you weapons. They gave them weapons at that time that the Arabs didn't see. Like, they didn't come across these weapons, shooting like these kind of machine gun type of things in those days. And they used to cause a lot of violence. And then in 1947, the United Nations passes the resolution 181, Palestine is to be partitioned. Now, the United Nations, Palestine is to be partitioned and Jerusalem is to be an international. See how things are done slowly. Okay? Slowly. They didn't say it's the home of the Jewish state. That's what they're saying now. Donald Trump recently, in his recent tenure as president, not now, before, 4 years ago, he actually moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv, and he said it's in Jerusalem. We recognize, Americans recognize the capital of the Israeli Jewish state, not to be Tel Aviv, to be Jerusalem. But the United Nations, they didn't consider it that way. At that time, it was no. That's an international city. Neither did it belong to the Muslims, neither did it belong to the Jews. And slowly, this is how they do things. If you ever want to get over a phobia, you have to do things slowly. That's exactly how they're doing things. For example, if you're scared of spiders, you really are scared of spiders, they're not going to say go into a room and pick up a spider. They know you're scared of spiders. What they will say is that go into a room and stand as far back as possible from the spider and just get used to the spider. And you'll see the spider is not going to jump at you. It's not going to attack you. And once you get used to this, nothing's happened. Then you get closer to the spider. After a few weeks and a few months, you get closer. And then somebody will say, here, pick up the spider. Look, touch it. Nothing's happening. You let it roll on your hand. And then eventually, your phobia will go. And that's exactly the mindset of the Muslim world, how they did it slowly. Oh, look, they're not fighting back. Oh, look, we're doing a genocide. Nothing's happening. Oh, look, they're all gathering together, 57 Arab countries, Muslim countries, and they're having a great Kodak moment. But still, we've killed 100,000. Even non-Muslims are coming out on the streets and saying, this is genocide. But the Muslim world is just sitting there, eating big feast. This is what you call desensitization. And then in 1948, the Arab-Israeli war begins. The Muslim world did try and fight back. And I'll tell you how that ended up. Didn't end up really well at all. The famous one, 1967 Six-Day War. This is when they took over Jerusalem properly. And this is like 6 days. It's called a 6-day war. And you're talking countries. You had Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan. All of these countries with their armies and their military and their aircraft and their navy, soldiers, they went in against Israel and they lost in 6 days. Subhanallah. And I always say, and more soldiers lost in that particular battle, or less soldiers, Israel lost lives than those who have died. It's been 2 years and they still cannot achieve their objectives against people who are running around in flip-flops and slippers. You don't know where they're getting their ammunition from. Because I always say people who are fighting for their rights, evicted from their houses, then maybe to a certain degree there's an element of divine intervention or help. And those who are fighting for nationalism, they'll be finished in 6 days. Let's look at the statistics here. Egypt, it was the largest military power, Arab military power, led by President Jamal Abdel Nasser. Jordan controlled the West Bank and East Jerusalem before the war. Syria was involved in fighting with its army in the Golan Heights. Iraq sent troops and aircraft to support the coalition, and Lebanon, Algeria, Saudi Arabia and Sudan, they gave logistical support and moral support, financial support, but they didn't send the troops in. And look at the result here. Israeli troops, according to the historical figures, 264,000. The Arab troops were 500,000, 500,000. Egypt had 240,000 just by itself. Jordan had close to over 200 as well. So we had a good amount of troops with the Arabs, and then you had 250,000 of the Israeli troops. Israel lost 46 aircraft in the 46 days. So they lost 46 aircraft. The Arabs lost 400 aircraft. Do you know how that happened? Does anyone know? You see, the Israeli intelligence is very good, the Mossad intelligence. This is again historically recorded. When Egypt was about to launch an attack, because they had all these fighter jets from Russia. They had good relationship with Russia back in those days. And the Israeli Mossad agency, they found out exactly where the coordinates for where all of these aeroplanes were situated. So whilst the Arabs the night before were getting ready, okay, we're going to do this, in the middle of the night, the Israeli planes came and they started to bomb the runways, and then they kept going back and bombing, and they took out the entire Air Force in one night. 24 hours, gone. The Arabs have lost air superiority and the Israelis had the air superiority. And then the war began. So tanks and all this other kind of stuff, and the casualties, it's mentioned Israel only lost 800 men, women or in the infantry, and the Arab coalition lost 15 to 25,000. And then on June the 7th, 1967, only after 6 days, the Israeli forces raised their flag over the Dome of the Rock. They are actually now in Al-Aqsa. But obviously they were told to retreat by the United Nations. Don't make it that blatant. Okay, remember, it's still under the Jordanians. It's under the Waqf program by the Jordanians. You can't, it's something that's, you can't just make it that blatant. But they just wanted to show symbolism. Look, wave the flag, we're back. And that's what happened in the 6 Day War. So as a result of this war, the Sinai Peninsula was captured by Israel. Captured from who? Egypt. So Egypt lost that. In the 6 Day War, Egypt lost the Gaza Strip. Israel took over the strip of Gaza. Jordan lost the West Bank. East Jerusalem, Israel took it. And the Golan Heights, Israel took it from Syria. So that's just then. Then you had the Yom Kippur War. I don't want to go through all the wars. Do your own research. There was more wars that took place, and every time the Muslims attacked, they were defeated. So it does go to show that the Muslims did want to try and reclaim or fight back against the oppression. Because the Naqba, the great catastrophe happened when the Jews came, the Israeli state, when it was formed in 1948, or was that particular time, they uprooted so many in their thousands Palestinians, and they killed so many. And that was called the Great Catastrophe. And then after that, we've been seeing resolution upon resolution, United Nations. It went down to militia groups who wanted to resist. You had Yasser Arafat, PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization. You had Fatah, and then Hamas, it came later. You had so many PA, Palestinian Authority. The armies were finished. Then it went down to these resistance, so-called resistance groups. And now we find ourselves in the situation we find ourselves in. So this was basically a timeline of, from the demise of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, how we find the Muslims ended up in this situation. Okay? Few quick lessons. I'm going to wrap this up in 4 or 5 minutes. The lessons, like I mentioned, right there in front of you. Muslims too busy fighting each other, no unity, fragmented. Enemy from within. Ottoman Empire wasn't destroyed from external. Part of it was internal. And it's documented and recorded. British are quite vocal about this. Yes, we sent Lawrence of Arabia, we promised them that we'll give you this, and we backstabbed them. It's there. Sykes and Picot agreement is there. But as they say, life goes on, get over it. What are you going to do about it? This is basically, okay. Lessons we learn, unity is very important. Wallahi, unity is very important. History teaches us that when we separate, we become weak, we are an easier target. Okay? The Palestine agenda is well underway. They will do what they wanted to do. They are determined to make the Haykal Suleiman again, get rid of Masjid al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount is very important to them. So that's their agenda, and the way it's going, it seems that they will meet their objectives. Something closer to home, not to do with Palestine, is the far right is growing. You saw the march 2 weeks ago. 100,000 country, our country that we call our country, who came to London and they were waving the flags. They were waving, where majority of the people, mind you, majority of the people, they didn't go to vent against Muslims. They went because they were not happy with the government. They felt asylum was a big issue. Against Muslims, Islamophobia, Tommy Robinson, Elon Musk, all of these people, they came on, the kalima, the shahada, the flag was torn to pieces on stage. The Palestine flag was torn to pieces. On stage, on social media you can see, they're making statements saying how Islam is detrimental to the entire Europe. You need to get rid of this problem of Islam. Islam is a problem. So the point I'm trying to make is what? Far right is growing, Islamophobia is growing. There could be a strong chance that reform may be the next government. Nigel Farage can be, or strong possibility that his government may come in because of public sentiment, that they are seeing all these things and they're not happy with X, Y, and Z. Conservative is not a viable alternative. They don't like conservative anymore. Labour is too left-wing. Liberal Democrats too left-wing. Nigel Farage, Reform UK. That is for the common people a solution, and it doesn't look good for us. So what is our take-home point? We need to unite. 2013, I remember Haji Salim rahimahullah in Green Lane Masjid. I remember for 6 months we didn't find the killer. I remember I went on Crime Watch UK to appeal on behalf of the masjid. They did a segment on Crime Watch UK, how Haji Salim used to sit in the front, pray all the namaz after Isha on that evening. He's going home on his walking, on his carrying his stick, and then he was literally yards from his house. And that Ukrainian 37-year-old, he died in prison, by the way, last week. He died in prison. He stabbed him to death. Then they're trying to find this killer. Months later, there are explosives that are left outside mosques in Tipton, in Wolf, in another masjid. And then they found fingerprints. When they arrested that person for the using explosives or trying to, they linked it to the murder of Uncle Salim, Haji Salim rahimahullah. What does that mean? Far right, they are willing to kill Muslims. They are willing to start a war against Muslims. Right-wing extremism is growing. Brenton Tarrant in New Zealand, remember when he went into Christchurch, into the masjid, and he just shot 50 Muslims, killed them. So the take-home point I want to finish on this is, whether we Muslims, 3 million, 4 million, however many we are in this country, we have to stick together. Stick together as a minority, because things are going to get difficult. And history testifies when we are pushing and pulling in different directions, aiming at each other, instead of uniting, we're fighting with each other. Targets. We're easier targets. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make things easy for us. Wallahi, history is very important for us as an ummah. Research, look into our history, especially with what went wrong. Yes, part of the solution is turn back to Allah, pray to Allah, connect to Allah, but that's not it all. That is very important, but alongside this you have to lobby. Alongside praying to Allah and being proactive, you have to engage in certain things. You cannot just say, we're just going to pray and that's it. History shows us this. That's never happened. Historically, that has never happened. People like Nuruddin al-Zingi, Imaduddin Zingi, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, they just didn't say, okay, we're just going to pray. They were proactive in uniting the ummah first, putting the differences to the side, looking at the bigger threat first. And then once you get rid of the bigger threat, then you can say, okay, you're my Muslim brother, what is the disagreement? We haven't united on these theological differences in 1400 years. What makes you say we're going to, unite now? Let's just get on. You follow your way, we follow our. You preach your way, we preach our way. We'll all call towards Quran and Sunnah, but make sure you look at the time and the place. Today is dangerous time now for the Muslims. Come together, show unity when it comes to the threat that we're facing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make things easy. Jazakumullah khair. I don't think we got time for questions because 8:30.